When Peter King said Bannon does not represent anything he stands for as a conservative.
It's not even so much as a political issue, almost as a moral issue. This guy does not belong on the national stage. He looks like some disheveled drunk that wandered onto the political stage.
Joining me now is former Romney campaign advisor Stuart Stevens and CNN political commentators Mary Catherine Ham and Jack Kingston. Stuart Stevens, I mean, you heard what Congressman King say. I don't know if you want to comment on his characterization, but just in general about what King is saying about Steve Bannon and his role in the Republican Party. How do you see it moving forward?
Well, look, I think Steve Bannon made the mistake that a lot of people do when they first get involved in politics and they end up working for a campaign that wins. You think that people voted for you and not the candidate. That's not the case. I mean, this was particularly toxic in Alabama, where Bannon took the stage. I mean, you had a guy in Roy Moore, who came across as kind of a creepy guy, and you combine him with Bannon, who comes across as a creepy guy with a drinking problem. And I mean, they might as well ended up driving around the state in a panel van with free candy on the side. It just was daring people in Alabama not to vote for him, and enough took them up on their dare.
Well,
Jack?
But on the other hand, and I know Stuart would agree with this, if you think about James Carville, he started wearing blue jeans everywhere he went, and then suddenly every consultant that I met for the next 10 years wore blue jeans. So consultants kind of like that disheveled, outsider kind of hip look. But I think the substance of the matter is that he picked the wrong candidate. He should have done proper opposition research and saw this guy was sitting on an explosion, and that's what happened. Mary
Catherine, there was another GOP congressional source telling CNN, referring to Steve Bannon, saying his credibility is shot. Do you think that's true, or do you think it's too broad?
Look, I think it took a hit. Well, anytime you lose, that'll take a hit, although, as we know, many political consultants lose many, many times and still are not out of the game. I think there will be an audience for Bannonism, and I think it's up to the rest of the GOP to make an argument to that audience without condescending to them, to say, look, you've got Trump at the head of the party. He is the grenade thrower, he's the fighter, he's the outsider that this part of the base wanted. But it's not working in other places, and it's not working in many of these Senate seats. And if you lose a lot of those seats, it will be damaging to Trump, who is the person that they support. I'm not sure that that actually works. You may end up with Bannon-type wins in primaries that do end up torpedoing other Senate races. It's a real risk.
Yeah, I mean, Stuart, this was a very close race, and you can argue, well, it shouldn't have been close in Alabama, in a red state like Alabama. But had Roy Moore won, even just by a little bit, I'm wondering if people would be saying Steve Bannon, was very prescient for continuing to stick by him, and that this is just the next wave of Bannon candidates.
Listen, Anderson, you and I know, everybody knows that if Roy Moore had won, Steve Bannon would have been up on that stage last night instead of hiding back in the back room. But listen, I just want to say one thing. Those of us who weren't for Roy Moore, who are Republicans, I don't think we really should be patting ourselves on the back too much, because this was a race that was won by African Americans in Alabama. And I think it's just very important and very, frankly, moving to me that when there was a call to decency, not for the first time, black Alabamians saved Alabama from their worst instincts. I mean, they voted in record numbers. They won the day yesterday, and I think that's just a tremendous step in this long civil rights march that Alabama has been at the center of.
I think there's another thing at play here, though, which is, and I don't want to take away from that, I think Democrats did a really good job with GOTV, with black Alabamians specifically, but there's also this part where they've taken, GOP looks like it's taking college-educated white moms, married women who they normally do well with in these exurbs and suburbs, and turning them into essentially what might be a swing vote. And if that happens, if that holds in the future, it happened a little bit in Virginia, now it's happened in deep red Alabama, despite, of course, this is a uniquely bad candidate, but that's a pattern that will not help them.
What do they do about that, though?
Well, as I was saying, I think there has to be an appeal to the more Trump-friendly base to say, look, we need candidates who will bring these folks back in, because the GOP cannot win without some of these, particularly married women, is a block that they've done well with in the past, and they're losing them in.
Do you think some of it has to do with the president himself and the accusations against him?
Yes, I think it does. But if you look at places, where Ron Johnson won ahead of Trump, there are instances where guys can run ahead of him and do well in those sectors, but they have to play a different kind of game. very different from the president.
And they have to have a really good ground game. One of the big winners yesterday really was Mayor Woodfin of Birmingham. If you look at his election, he even though he was Hillary's state chairman, he utilized the Sanders Network, Working Families Party. You know, they had grassroots, and he tied in other coalitions that Bernie Sanders had, and the union vote, and I think because he was just elected, he had this great ground game. And by the way, remember, he beat a fellow Democrat. So he put to work, I think, his maybe liberal ideological team who were already in place, and they knew how to get there.
Stuart, I mean, if you're advising President Trump now about who do you listen to moving forward? I mean, do you keep running with Steve Bannon? Do you start, talking to Mitch McConnell more and listening to him, or listening to Ivanka Trump? I mean, what do you do?
Well, I think with the surprise of the Trump election, there were those that said that all the political rules that we've lived by are thrown out the window, that characteristics like likability and decency and kindness and graciousness, which are really the hallmarks of the Reagan presidency, of the first Bush presidency, those of us who were drawn to the party because of those qualities, that they're no longer needed, that they're no longer valued at the ballot box. I don't think that's the case. And when you look around at candidates that are doing well, these are very likable, decent people who are about bringing people together and not dividing. I mean, say what you will, my friend Ed Gillespie lost in Virginia, but he lost to someone who really was very likable. And I think that Jones is just a very likable, decent guy that you could be for, even if you didn't agree with him on every issue. And I think that's where the political heart of America still beats, and I think to look at Trump and say that this is just all thrown out the window would be a mistake. And Bannon is just an angry guy who is trying to ride and prove that it's okay to be angry. But I just don't think it's appealing to people.
It is interesting because when Bannon left the White House, there were all of those quotes from him about, we're going to war, and this is, he's going to be leading the charge on getting Trump-like candidates all across, in races all across the country. I mean, to Stuart's point, Mary Catherine, do you think people just don't really want to live in a permanent state of war or want to tear down all institutions?
No, I think some people do, and I think Bannon is one of them. And some people will be very receptive. I mean, one of the reasons that people were willing to vote for Roy Moy, despite much of the things, many things wrong with him as a candidate, was that he would upset Republicans in Washington, D.C. That was a feature of this candidate. And so I think he will continue to find an audience for people who do want to throw that grenade. But I think, yes, the broader public, and like I said, that new swing